Yo, let's go. Welcome to the 2025 U.S. Cadet Championship. This is the recap of the first 4 rounds. Let's take a look at this. I am FIDE Master James Canty III here, and I'm going to bring you the recaps of the 2025 U.S. Cadet Championship. Now, as we see here on the screen, we're talking about what is it? The 2025 U.S. Cadet Championship is an 8-player round-robin tournament with players invited based on ratings. The event will take place in Schaumburg, Illinois, and begins on June 19th. Now, here are the contestants. We have International Master Tani Adewume here, 2376 out of New York. You have FIDE Master Lynn Brian Inming, Lynn from New York. Then you have Henry Dang, who's a FIDE Master from California. Everyone all the way down is FIDE Master, and then Candidate Master there at the bottom with Ajaneya Tripathi Ryo as a Candidate Master out of Illinois. We have Linksy Zhu is New York, FIDE Master. Andrew Jiang from Georgia, FIDE Master. You have Julian Colville from California. Rose Atwell from California as well. The time control is 90 minutes for all moves with a 30-second increment from move 1, and the winner earns $1,000 in cash as well as $10,000 in scholarships. Now, let's take a look at round 1. Okay, here we are with round 1. We're going to take a quick look at each game here before we get into round 2 as well here. In the first round, we have Julian Colville here, FIDE Master, versus Brian Lynn, FIDE Master as well. Here we go with the game as it starts with e4, e5, bishop c4, a bishop's opening, and after bishop c4, there's knight f6 attacking the pawn. Knight c3 defends the pawn. Pretty easy. Knight c6, quick development theory so far, right? Knight a5, which is attacking the bishop. We want the bishop pair quite early here. So now knight g to e2, c6 with d5 intentions. We get castled, bishop to c5, obviously pinning. And bringing the bishop outside of the pawn chain, but also getting ready to castle, developing the bishop as well. Maybe lock the bishop outside the pawn chain at some point or play d5, right? So a3 with the b4 option, but also attacking or bringing the bishop back to a2. Knight takes c4, d takes c4, a5, and queen to d3. Very nice move here. Julian is preparing things like queen to g3. Castles from Brian Lynn and queen g3. Engine didn't like it as much. Engine actually just liked bishop e3, but at the same time, from a human standpoint, I like queen g3, which is attacking e5, and stuff like bishop h6. So d6, again, defending, locking the bishop outside of the pawn chain in a way, basically, before we do other operations. This bishop can now move out too as well. White goes with bishop g5, pinning the knight. Maybe some queen h4 action. Maybe you'll see something like king h1 and f4 as well, or rook a to d1. Queen e7. Engine did not like this. Engine always never likes what we play. But of course, at the same time, we keep playing. So they really like knight h5 here, which is not the easiest move to find, or make a4. But of course, at the same time, it's, you know, as you see the eval bar here and like minus 0.4, it's still very equal here. So don't pay too much attention to the evaluation. Queen e7, knight a4, same idea that black played in the beginning with knight a5 taking on c4. We want to do something with this bishop because it's quite annoying. We would love to get f4 in. Bishop h7, which stops that now. So now we won't capture here. But we still bring our pieces to the center of the board with rook to d1. Queen e6, queen h4 hitting the bishop, hitting the knight. So knight moves away. There'll be no damage of the structure. Bishop e7, which actually wins a quick pawn here. And after rook e8, we take the pawn. Queen takes c4 here, snatches a pawn as well. Knight comes back to c3, comes back home. But black is still lacking in some type of development. So a4 from black, maybe looking to gain some space. As you pay attention to the time too as well, it's always important to pay attention to the time, as that will help you make decisions, or, you know, mistakes come from not having enough time. So as you see, Brian here is not very low on time, but low enough to say that, hey, I am low on time here. And in the next 20 minutes or so, I could be in some danger of time. So I have to move quite quickly and manage my time well. But rook to d3, preparing to rook lift to this side of the board. Knight f8 with knight g6 intention. So bishop takes f8 makes a lot of sense because this knight would be a key defender on this side of the board. So rook takes f8, doubling up on the rooks. Bishop e6, finally develop my pieces. Engine wanted something like bishop c5, which is not even a human move. Bishop e6, knight to g3, bringing a piece to this side of the board. f6, knight h5, rook g3 intentions, maybe even rook d7 at the right moments here. Obviously, that sacrifices an exchange. Bishop f7, rook to the 7th rank. Bishop takes h5, queen takes h5, and here we go, bishop to d4. Now, it's going to get very crazy here because after the next few moves, something crazy happens. Rook takes b7, rook to b8, rook c7, rook fc8, rook e7, and then After king f8, a blunder on the board here. A blunder. Can you spot the move? Let me turn the analysis off. Can you spot the move? I mean, it is right behind me, the notation. But at the same time here, the move here, this is a blunder. Why? Because of the move that was found by Julian, which is knight to d5, and we live. What a strong move here with queen f7 being checkmate. Of course, this is the move we want to play. We really don't want to move this rook. In fact, we don't really have many places. We could go rook d7, right? But knight d5, extremely strong move. Defending the rook, the best defense is offense. We defend the rook and also threaten checkmate at the same time here. So queen takes d5 was basically forced here. And after e takes d5, king e7. And now we have some material. Yes, black has two rooks versus the bishop versus the rook and the queen. But with the king being in danger here and us still having lots of pawns with white, this is a conversion rate for white. Or not easy, but easy enough for us to convert with the white pieces. D6, threatening, king takes c3, picking up some material. So king went back to f8. We take on h7, and you can see this is going to be disastrous for Brian here. So rook to d8. There's c3 to attack the bishop. Bishop moves away. We go d7, pass pawns, must be pushed. Rook takes b2. I grab something for my troubles. And after check, having to go king e7 because king f7 allows queen takes d8. We snatch a pawn, and the rest is precision here. Rook takes f2, stepping out of the way, so there's no crazy checks. We're using this pawn too as well, maybe as a deflection. Queen check, g3, h5, push, push. Rook comes back to defend everything back here. Rook to c1 hits the bishop and the pawn. Rook takes with check, queen check, rook to c8, and game is over here. Lots of stuff, too many threats. And Julian wins this one. Brian Lynn throws in the towel. This is round one. Julian with a win with the white pieces. Next up, we had Henry Dang versus Rose Atwell here. In this game, here we go, e4, c5. A Sicilian defense, you already know it's going to be sharp. Knight c3, so either a closed Sicilian or Rossolimo type Sicilian as well by transposition. Knight to c6 and bishop b5. So some type of closed Rossolimo move order type of Sicilian here. Knight to d4, knight f3, all theory so far. a6, bishop back to d3. g6 and gig hassled. Bishop g7, rook e1. e6, knight takes d4, takes knight e2. All theory so far. This is a weaker pawn. Of course, it is double, but it can be easily defended. d5 trying to undouble the pawns, which happens from Rose. c3 trying to attack this pawn. Everything super equal so far. Knight e7, not the greatest, says the engine, but hey, who cares? Totally fine. We're still in the opening. Knight takes d4, strong move, and after takes bishop to e4 as an in-between move. This will give up our bishop pair, says black. Bishop takes f2, trying to get out of there with an extra pawn. But after king takes, surprisingly enough, because of the open position and the two bishops, the engine absolutely loves white's position. After queen to d6, you see d4. And queen takes h2, and Rose gets very pawn hungry here, taking the pawns, allowing some counterplay for white. Rook h1 hits the queen. Queen goes back to c7, and we go queen f3 here. It's problems for black trying to castle here because you may even have rook takes h7 at some point. There's queen f6, there's bishop h6, and you can start to feel the weakness in the dark squares and the lack of control over the dark squares because the dark square bishop is gone and black still needing to develop. The problem is the queen moved around a bunch of times here, allowing white to gain some time, even though king looks a little bit weird. But we have an open position with bishops and rooks that could be very deadly quite soon. f5, kick the bishop back. Bishop goes back. We have some range like this. Knight to d5. Bishop to g5. Obviously, just developing the bishop to a gray square. Attack those dark squares that are weak. Bishop d7, maybe looking to even castle queenside at the right moment. Hard to do that, though, with a bishop right here. Here we go. Attack the knight on d5. e6 is a weak backward pawn. So knight moves back to b6 here and rook a to e1. And black is already in trouble. e6 is a weakness here. Knight to c4, that allows takes, and boom, hit on b7 here. Now we even have rook takes e6 in some cases. If queen takes, then we'll come with rook e1. And if bishop takes, we have queen e7. We're also hitting a8 right now. So rook goes over to c8. Rook takes e6 is a move here, but of course, that actually something else was played, which was bishop to f6. Hitting the rook, again, rook takes e6 is a move, which is nice. b3 was also the engine's #1 choice, by the way. But bishop f6, rook to c7. After queen b8 check, bishop moves back to c8. Bishop takes rook here. Now we're up an entire rook with the white pieces. Rook to b7. Of course, this is defended right now with the queen, and black has their own type of play here. But b3, attacking while defending at the same time. Defending the b2 threat with the check, attacking the queen. So if you take mine, I take yours. Queen takes c3. Queen moves back into the defense of the king. So I can always run my king away, which kind of happens after rook c7. There's rook to c1, attacking the queen and the rook at the same time. And after a check, king to g3, stepping away. Bishop b7 with the threat of queen takes g2 gets answered with the final blow move, d5, and Rose loses this one after d5 with the threat of bishop takes queen and rook takes queen, rook takes rook or queen takes rook at the same time, while deflecting away or blocking the queen takes g2 move here. So really crazy game, lots of tactics. King got a little bit wild for white here. Black moved the queen a little bit too many times in this game. Totally normal, happens, tactics, right? But on to the next game, and this is still only the first round. In this next game, we have Tani versus Rayo here, or Raul as the last name, Anjanea. So here we go. Knight f3 from Tani and knight f6. b3, which is something I like to play too as well, or of course you just see a lot of players with the knight f3, b3 type of play, where you just want to get a game. It's also very fun, and it can get very tactical. So b6, bishop to b2, we have the symmetrical way of playing. e3, this is sort of a collie type of setup where you can just blitz these moves out quite quickly. e6 and d4, d5, symmetrical. c4, instead of going knight to d2, I'm the c4 option here. And after c4, bishop b4 check, knight to c3. Not afraid of knight e4 because we can easily parry it with rook to c1, play a3. There was the castles and a3, deciding, hey, where are you going to put this bishop? Bishop takes, knight e4. Of course, the bishop is hanging, so we move it back. Bishop to b2, a5, queen c2, ideas, bishop d3, even g4, g5, sometimes not even castling. Playing a4, trying to create some weaknesses on this side of the board. Tani responds with b4. After pawn takes, bishop takes, and knight to g5, which is an error here. And Tani finds the correct move, which is knight to d2, sacrificing the g2 pawn, and you should not take it here. But Anjanea says, yes, I'm going to take it anyway. I am a pawn grabber here. But the problem here is when you put this rook on the g file, you can already see how the pieces line up very, very scarily. Scarily, right? Very, very scary for black, but also very harmonious for white. Bishop moves away to d5, blocking the bishop. f4, kick the knight away. Not really many squares to go to. So knight f3 check. And after takes, d5, which opens up this diagonal. f6 to block it, but now we have this one to worry about. Queen e7, which blocks it. Tani goes with rook to g3, a hit the bishop, hoping the bishop will get off of this diagonal. What happens? The bishop gets off the diagonal. But the problem here now is that Tani has an incredible combination that he's able to spot here, and he goes with queen to g2, which first hits the rook in the corner, and rook takes g7 could be a possibility. After it was defended, well, we can play it anyway. Brilliant move. Rook takes g7. After queen takes, the idea here is e7 check, open up this bishop, which is what happens in the game. And after king h8, there was a promotion. Chose to take with the queen here, and here we go. The game ender here. Queen takes a8 with a resignation, with a very nice threat of bishop takes f6 being made next. Very nice game from Tani here, and on to the final game of round one. Here we go. This one's Andrew Jiang versus Azu here. So knight f3, knight f6, b3. Looks like the opening of the tournament so far. And after d5, bishop to b2. Bishop f5. Then we have the double fianchetto way of playing, which is very natural, very normal, very flexible way of playing. We just kind of see what black does, and obviously we're going to do what we want to do with the double fianchetto. So h6, bishop g2, and black is playing in the reverse London system type setup. After e6, we have castles in d3 with ideas of knight d2, rook e1, and play e4. So knight d2, rook e1, e4. There it is. So after bishop h5 takes, which is sort of normal, which is you play a game, right? That's what you want here from white standpoint. You have the double bishops here that are fianchetto, so you can kind of just play on both sides of the board depending on what black plays. Very natural way of playing. a3, so if a4 will go b4. Rook e8, knight around to f1. Lots of maneuvering here in this game. Knight moves around to e3, knight d4 with ideas of maybe knight to f5. c5, already a blunder here, says the engine. They want knight b5 here from an engine standpoint. But from a human standpoint, knight f5 is what we wanted to go to. This is a square we wanted, so this is a square we go for. Knight b5 is actually just incredible how this is even a thing. Knight b5 is just such a stranger. It's just strange. It's like different. It doesn't really do a lot yet, but it is a strong square. Hard to get off of. a4 and bishop e5 are things too as well that can be played. Hard to see that. Knight f5, can't blame him for not finding knight b5. So after d4, we take first to grab the bishop pair. After rook takes knight, we go knight to c4 with a very nice outpost. Can be kicked, but of course that will run into some problems here. So knight to e6, a4, stopping the b5 pawn from ever being pushed, and also controlling the b5 square as well, keeping this as a very nice outpost. Now, here we go, is a nice move here, is bishop takes d5, because knight d5 is just a blunder. After bishop takes, knight b6, and white is just better. Just better. I am winning in exchange. So queen c6 takes, and rook e8, and of course, white is just up in exchange right now. So knight b6, which was a nice move here, actually. I mean, the rook is going to take here. Knight b6 is played, engine like a couple other moves with bishop c1, queen g4, f4 was another move too. But knight b6, queen takes b6, bishop back around to c1, bishop b2. And obviously, we're just looking to convert. We have an extra exchange. Should be okay. Bishop f5, queen h5 hits the bishop, back it up. Queen h4, now the queen's out and developed. b6, f4, maybe g4 and f5 later, just gaining some space, maybe even rook e5 and doubling of the rooks. Queen f3, sort of annoying, so we get rid of it. Rook f1, bring the other rook into the game. White literally has no weaknesses, end up in exchange. Queen g4, very playable. In fact, the engine like, what, g4 is one, and rook e7, which is an awkward move to play. Queen g4, though, stepping out of the way, getting the queen kind of back in the game. Little shuffle here. Queen h5. g6 hangs a pawn. After takes, queen takes h6. Bishop back to c8, queen to g5. I mean, again, white is just up in exchange here. So very trivial for white. f5, stopping. Obviously, mate's coming. Be careful. So king f2, stepping out of the way. If a check, we just run for the hills. King e1, no problems at all. Queen g2, king e1, bishop f3. Threatening mate, don't get mated. So queen e7 attacks the knight while also defending the e2 square as well. Knight around the d6, rook takes f3, which picks up a piece, takes, check, and check again. In between moves, take the knight, and white's just winning. As we fast forward here, white is just up. And the final blow here is queen h4, which forces a queen trade. White is still up a bishop and wins the game. So lots of decisive wins in round one of the 2025 U.S. Cadet Championship. Let's see what happened in round two. Here we go with round two. In round two, we have Andrew Jiang versus Brian here. So, okay, here's the game. The game starts with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. And in this one, I really like the opening choice with a6, bishop a4, and knight g to e7. This is sort of like a delayed Cozio in a way, but it's still Cozio defense. Sometimes you can just go knight g e7 immediately, but a6, then knight g e7. So, after castles, knight g6, this can be aggressive depending on what white does and what black does too as well, but it's a very fun line to say the least. It's something to pick up if you are a Roy Lopez player and you want to look for something a little bit different. Cozio. So c3 and d5, this is all theory. After takes, queen takes, there's d4. And after d4, bishop to g4, still following theory here. And after bishop b3, there's this nice move, bishop takes f3, with the intention of if you take my queen, I take yours. And if you take the bishop, well, then I'm going to damage the structure on the king side. So bishop takes d5, bishop takes d1, rook takes, and castles queen side, which hits the bishop here. Bishop to f3, and immediately the engine says this is not correct because there are some tactics involved, which we'll see right now. E takes d4, bishop takes c6, takes, bishop c5, really nice, which is a pin on the d file. Bishop e3, but it doesn't defend the pawn. Bishop takes d4 is a brilliant move here. Why? Well, there's rook takes d4 and bishop takes d4. If rook takes d4, we have this line with a rook takes d4, bishop takes, and rook d8 with a back rank problem. So, what happens in the game is bishop takes d4, bishop takes d4. c5, so now if the bishop moves, there will be problems on the back rank. So knight d2, and after pawn takes, black's just up a pawn, looking to convert. Knight b3, knight f4, and now black is really just looking to convert this game. Knight e2 check is coming, especially if we see knight takes d4, there'll be rook takes followed by knight d2 check. Knight c5, rook d5, which attacks the knight. b4, knight e6, looking for trades. Knight d3 and a5. Black is up a pawn. a5 is nice, so if ba5, we will see stuff like c5, c4 later on. a3. King d7, get the king involved. So f4, f6, king f2, and g5. Hits this pawn, playing on both sides of the board. F takes g5, f takes g5, rook f8 check coming next. Rook f8 played. King to d6, get an active king somewhere in the end game, or etc. Right? Of course, the king is a fighting piece itself when pieces are starting to come off, and especially when an end game is active. Knight to b2, king back to d7. Right? Knight c4 check was incoming. Knight back to d3. Knight f4, not repeating with king d6. Knight e5 check. King moves around. Knight still gets around to c4, but in this case, the king can wiggle around to be able to get closer to the action, especially if we end up trading pieces. Knight b3, pawn to d3, knight d2, knight e2. And here we go. This is a beautiful sequence of moves. Is g4 with ideas of like rook h5, rook f6, and sacrificing with some type of mate here. I forgot what they even call it, corridor mate or something. But you can see the mate ideas. So rook to rook to b1, a4 check, but we don't care about it too much. A4 check, bring the king back. And here we go, g3, which threatens mate. Strong move. h3, rook f2 threatens mate again with a sacrifice. Rook h3, rook h2. b5 check, one last check, one last ditch effort. King to b7, not allowing rook takes e6 check. Knight f1, and here's the move. Rook takes h3 and GG. Very strong move. After gh3, there will be g2 check, and then mating with g1, or even taking the knight with a double check. Awesome game here from Andrew. Next, we have Tani versus Linksy Zhu. e4, c5, knight f3, e6. Tani is a Tomanov player, and he loves playing this opening and scores quite well with it. So after d4, takes, knight c6. Very flexible is the Tomanov. Knight to c3, queen to c7, and knight b5. Not a variation that's played a lot. So queen to b8, bishop to d3, and knight f6. Same stuff you would generally play. Very easy play for black. You get to kick this knight back. You can play bishop e7 or d6 or d5, bishop c5. Really depends on what you're looking to play. Castles, bishop to e7, c4, and a6, kicking that knight back. Takes, taking with the d pawn, which opens up the d file. Knight to c3, and this game gets incredibly tactical after e5 first, which is deterring an f4. So bishop to e3, bishop e6, get my pieces developed. That's what helps here too as well with the e5 move. Okay, rook to b1 and b5. After the b5 move, there's queen e2, and castle's getting out of the way. f3, rook to d8, rook to d1. Natural moves, development is just ensuing here. Very equal game. h5, h4, h3 is a common plan you'll see in Najdorf Sicilians, but also in just regular Sicilians period, sometimes in Carol Kahn's, the classical variations, and etc. So b3, h4, we're just looking to gain some space, maybe bring this knight around too as well, and create some dark square weaknesses. Queen to f2. This pawn really isn't hanging yet because there will be some ideas with this bishop attacking the queen. So rook to d7, because now we're looking for those ideas, for instance, knight d5 or knight g4, if queen takes h4 here. g3, bishop around to b4, which hits the knight. Knight moves away. Queen over to f8. Nice move from Tani here, which is highlighting some dark squares, also getting the rook involved next as well. c5, rook to d8, doubling of the rooks on the d file. Knight to c1, which is an error. Here we go, knight h5. Now this knight is really strong. Threatening stuff like pawn takes, of course, knight f4 in some cases with bishop takes c5. You can just smell the tactics. Also f5 is coming too as well. Queen over to c2. Pawn takes on g3, takes. Knight takes g3, thanks for the pawn. Queen h2 hits the knight. Do we move the knight? Not today. f5 actually is a nice tactic with the idea of queen takes g3 and f4 to follow, which is a fork. Bishop to g5 hits the rook. So we play bishop takes c5 first, which is check. And then now the knight and the rook is hanging. But, you know, when your rook is hanging or when you have two pieces hanging, you sack one. No, of course, that's not what the rule is. But here, there's an exchange sacrifice involved here, which the knight is an absolute monster here. So now after bishop takes d8, queen takes, now we're threatening the d file as well. Really strong stuff here. So rook to b2, g6. The idea here is rook h7. Queen h6, and we do it anyway after queen f6, which is actually trapping the queen. This is defended. Bishop c2, looking for a rook trade, but in fact, we don't rook trade at all because the queen is actually trapped there on h6. So rook to h7, which attacks the queen. The queen is actually trapped, except rook d8 check, and after queen takes d8, queen g6 check, king to h8, and there is a resignation, and Tani wins again here, with queen d2 being a checkmate here. There's also mating ideas with like rook h2, queen h4, queen h1, which is a longer mate, but queen d2 is coming next, and Tani wins this game. Next up, Henry Dang versus Anjanaya Rayo. So e4, c5, knight c3. We have the Grand Prix type of Sicilian. So e6, very flexible. g3, now a closed type of Sicilian. d5, bishop g2, and we capture. knight takes, and there's an incredible sequence that happens here that's actually missed from both players. After bishop e7, queen g4, blunder! And here's the blunder. In fact, f5, yeah, queen takes g7. It's not about taking the knight. In fact, there's an incredible miss here, which is queen to d4, right? So now attacking the knight, or not take with the queen, but basically the knight is on pre and the queen is hanging. So if the queen moves away, which there actually are no squares, in fact, queen takes d4. But after pawn takes, look at this knight trap. This is a very strange knight trap that was missed by both players here. And of course, it's just unusual that the knight gets trapped like that, but it was missed. In fact, so the move in the game was g6. So queen e2, knight f6, and the game goes on. Castles, we develop pieces, rook moves over, develop pieces, always develop your pieces, right? c3, which was stopping knight d4, by the way. So we have a trade, e5, idea, bishop e6. Bishop f8, getting rid of this annoying bishop first. Get the queen off of the d file. Obviously, we were attacked there. Bishop back, f6, defends the pawn. h4, bishop e6, very nice, right? h5, rook d8. Knight h4, queen f7, which is defending the g6 pawn. b3, stopping a bishop to c4, and also maybe preparing c4, but knight d4 will be quite annoying. a6, stopping a queen to b5, and also preparing a b5. f4, takes, and it's getting quite dicey here. Maybe there's a g5. This is hanging. Got to watch out for f5. This is also a thing as well. f5 played just so it can't be played by white. Takes, e5, opening up the very strong bishop on the diagonal. Bishop e7 hits the knight. Queen to f2 defends the knight. c4, attacking b3. Pawn takes, bishop to b6. So, okay, we should probably trade. And it happens. Rook takes d1, and rook to c8, putting the rook on the file here. Queen to g3, that hits g6. Now, incredible move here. You can play king to g7, which is totally possible, but it is not, it doesn't help as much. It's just not, it's passive, to say the least, right? King g7 is passive. It's not as active. That's the word we're looking for. Rook d7 will be the move there. g5 is a very active move. Now, you can't really touch anything right now due to the king being where it is, but it is better than playing passively. Pawn takes g5, f4, which is attacking the queen. Queen to d7 and bishop e6, which hits the queen, but also stopping queen takes c8. Check. So queen takes, sacrifice, brilliant move because I get the queen right back with bishop to d5. Best move is takes because king f7 will run into a g6, which is a huge blunder. So queen takes, and now we have an endgame here, right? Endgame where, of course, white is up a pawn, but these pawns are kind of weak here, and really anything can happen. As you see, it's zeros here, but you're playing a human and it's practical. So let's see what happens. Bishop takes g5. Knight moves around to f3. Now we have a pawn. Grab one of those pawns there from white. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Right, correct. So grab the pawn back. 3 against 3. Knight f3. Bishop back to d8, looking for trades and go into an endgame. White says no, not yet. So we bring the king up. King activity, very important in any endgame. Rook d7, attacking, hitting this pawn. So I'll snatch a pawn. But the king is very active. Even though I'm down a pawn, I'm very active. This is one thing to understand. In games, especially when you have a king in game with pawns, is get that king active. And of course, can I get pawns and what do I want to do with my pawns as well? So king e4 hits the knight. The king is in the center of the board, ideally placed, even though it's equal, but you need extreme accuracy here. King f2, rook to c7, looking for some trades. Rook to d6, which is a blunder. Bishop e7, rook e6, and after takes, there is rook check. King moves away. Now, if king takes knight, there is rook takes e7, and there's no clear way yet to win. So black chooses bishop to b4, which is a great move here. Only move, in fact, basically is why it says it's great. Knight moves over to h2, but that allows rook takes a2 with checking possibilities. f3 being a thing, d4 is hanging. And out of nowhere, the activity of the pieces with the passed pawn is what makes black winning. After rook to e8, there's bishop to c3 with bishop d4 check. Pushing of the pawn, we take with check. Then we go f3 with a little mating net here. So now after captures, we have the bishop, the rook, and the extra pawn, which should be enough. After e7, there's check, and of course a resignation here because king h3 will run into rook h1 and mate. So that's it. Round 2, a lot of decisive results. Again, of course, that's what you want to see is some great chess and then battle it out. Now, let's take a look at what happened in round 3. Here we are with round 3 of the 2025 U.S. Cadet Championship. And in this first game here, we have Rose Atwell versus Brian Lynn. Let's see what happens. D4, not the E4. It's just so much E4 these days. But D4 happens, and knight f6 and bishop f4, a London system. Will it be a JOBAVA, one of my favorites? No. It's just going to be a London, regular London, but that's totally fine. So after knight f3, e6, e3, c5. And the thing about the London system is you can just play it so fast and really not even, use too much time. In fact, it's an easy opening to play with lots of fun and a lot of attacking possibilities depending upon what black plays. So c3, bishop to d6, bishop g3. Not allowing, obviously, bishop takes, which is possible to actually anchor the e5 square. But Rose shows the conservative bishop to g3, castles, knight b d2, the usual stuff. Knight moves into e5, and some of the lines that are strong here are c4, which is kind of annoying to face. But knight to d7 happens, and f4, so more of aggressive intentions. Bishop d3 is coming, maybe queen f3 all the way over to h3 type ideas. There it is. Bishop goes around to d3, b5, castles, c4, but look at that bishop able to tuck right there, which is why c4 sometimes is generally nice to stop this bishop coming into d3. So bishop to b7, queen f3, ideas, bishop h4, which happens in the game. Takes, and queen over to h3. Allowing queen takes c3 because there's going to be problems with knight takes d7 and of course the whole king side being ripped open here. So h6, stopping anything happening on the h7 square. e4, very aggressive tactics here. The queen is actually defending c3 as well. So after pawn captures, knight takes c4, which is very nice. This pawn was defending it. Not anymore. Now after pawn takes, knight takes c4, which is going to grab the bishop pair at the very least. So grabbing the bishop pair, then we follow up with rook to d1. Very nice move. Obviously, it's just defending stuff. Knight takes d7 was actually better, followed by f5 per the engine. Just being very ultra aggressive here. But rook to d1, bring another piece in the game is never usually a bad idea. Knight to d5 to get out of the line of fire. So c4, which hits the knight. Knight moves around to b4, hits the bishop. We vote bishop b3 with ideas of c5 and d5, depending upon what black does. But knight takes e5 gives us a very strong pawn structure. After takes and queen over to d7, a whole bunch of moves here. Even bishop f6 jumps out immediately is the move for me that I love to look at and play. This type of move because it's just extremely strong. But you have lots of other moves too as well. And Rose chooses rook to f4. Very strong. Rook g4, also wanting to double the rooks and other things. So bishop to c6, bringing the rook over to g4. White is just in control here altogether as black just doesn't really have the counterplay. King to h7, stepping off the line because bishop f6 was definitely coming. So d5, not only is it, blocking the queen now, this rook is, that is, we don't have the queen trade, but d5 is incredibly strong. After pawn takes, we take back, and there's already some serious problems here with black's position. So black actually just chooses to sacrifice a piece rather than do anything else. Sacrificing a piece with knight d3 with the intention or idea of, watch this, after taking the bishop, queen to d4 check. And this is actually, whoa, wait, what's going on? After king h1, knight f2, right? Well, wait, you can't right now because the bishop will defend d1. So Brian says rook takes b3, getting rid of the defense of the d1 rook. But it doesn't work. Rose says, I'll just take back because if you do go knight f2 check, I'm just going to take, and there is no mate, and you're also down material. Bishop g1 covers everything. Nice calculation. So after the b3 move, there was f5, and then queen takes d3 from Rose here, which is a really strong move. Look at this one, f5. Queen takes d3, because if you take my queen with the pawn, I'll take with my rook. And if you trade, well, that's exactly what I want. Now I'm just up a clear piece here. Rook f1 is a threat, so we go back home. e3, I'm wanting to get e2 in. I just go king g1. So now after e2, which is played rook to e1, which stops rook f1 check, no problems or issues. And after g5, bishop to f2, and Brian throws in the towel with a resignation there. So another decisive game. This one is actually Julian versus Engineer Rayo. Let's take a look at what happened. e4 and e6, the French defense. d4, d5, and bishop to d3 with his the Schlechter variation, which is sort of unorthodox in a way, but the idea here is after takes, which is a main line, knight f6 and bishop f3, just keeping pressure on this diagonal where the bishop generally will be trying to go bishop d7. c5, all theory here, knight e2, knight c6, bishop e3. And it could be some massive trades here, but knight to e5 attacking the bishop, knight to c3, and after a6, queen e2, castles queenside being the idea. Knight takes f3, g takes f3. I love this idea here. I'm a fan of just unorthodox type of play. So g takes f3, rook g1, castles queenside is the ideas. Queen c7, getting out of the way, rook on the d file. Bishop d7 with the castle queenside coming next too as well. Rook to g1, castle queenside, castle to the same side of the board. Besides the structural difference here, it's just an equal game. Knight to b3, e5, and the move bishop a7, stopping the king from moving the b8, which is pretty awesome. Pretty cool, looking for some type of play. So bishop to b4 and queen to e3 with the idea of bishop b6. Bishop takes c3, pawn takes, and bishop to e6. Now bishop b6 will be answered with an easy rook d1 and move the queen away. So rook takes d8, queen takes d8, queen takes e5, queen b8 being a thing, but not anymore after knight d7. Another pawn is kind of hanging, not captured though, but queen to d6. Queen c7, looking for a trade here. And notice that, this is kind of crazy. When do you ever have two sets of double pawns here, right? This is a very rare occasion here. We have two sets of double pawns. So even though white has an extra pawn, but where is it exactly, right? Because having the two sets of double pawns plus the opposite color bishops, black is actually just fine. Bishop to d4, wanting to take on g7, rook to g8, and he takes on g7 anyway. Grabs a pawn, but again, look at these pawns here. Not great. f6, trapping the bishop in because the rook is actually not defended. So a3 is just a random move, but in a way it is a move that makes some sense in a way. It's just a waiting move, trying to see what black will do next. Knight e5, wanting f3. Now rook to g3. This can be taken, but knight c4 was actually the move, hitting a3. Bishop takes f6. After takes. Knight d4. You can start to see this thing just peter out in a way, as there's no real play for both sides here, especially with white having two sets of double pawns here. Black could even be one, maybe to push for more, but not very likely, especially again with the opposite color bishops. Knight over to f5, rook g6, bishop check, knight around. Still no trades yet, f4. Now we trade the rooks, then we trade the knights, and as you see, opposite color bishops, white can still try to push here, but it's not enough. Bishop to g6, b5, a5 type of ideas, pushing these pawns down the board. G4 was the move. In fact, c4 was the engine recommendation here, which is like not that easy to find, to be honest. But even then, it's still only half a pawn better for white. G4, c4 found, king c3, bringing the king to the center. I get one, you get one kind of thing. E4 connecting the pawns. 3 versus 3 here. And apparently here, it's completely winning with f5 check, which is a very natural move here. f5, and apparently it's just winning. Like, easier said than done, guys. Study your in-games at home. f5 is winning. After king e7, there's king e3, and then king f4, and it's just winning, because it is. Okay, cool, got it. So, bishop g7, bishop d1, f5 check. G4 is actually hanging, but h6 is hanging as well. Takes. And, of course, 2 pawns here. You can even do what they call the one diagonal method, if possible, if this bishop can get over here to the d7 square and just hold both of these pawns. This will be an easy draw. a5, king over to e5. Pushing c3. Bishop back to c1, bishop e2, king over to d5. And as we see, the king needs to be around these pawns while the bishop will actually stay around here. Push, bishop around to f3, pushes again. I'm going to attack these pawns. Push, and of course, king takes with a draw offer to follow, because bishop takes is happening, and then it's going to be a shuffle. First draw out of 3 rounds here. First draw, but still more chess to be played. Next game, Henry Dang versus Lingxi Zhu. E4, c5, knight c3, e6, and d4. This is one that isn't played as much. The idea here is to just play a different type of Sicilian. After c takes d4, queen takes, knight c6, which attacks the queen. Queen moves away, and knight f6. Knight f3, bishop b4. This stuff is very fun to play for white, but also black can get some Sicilian type positions, which they are looking for. After takes. Now the idea here is taking on g7. So castles, now we can take on e4. Bishop d3, which defends the pawn. d5, pawn takes, and bishop e3. I'm going queenside. Knight e4, takes. Now I can't go queenside anymore. So rook d1, queen over to c7, knight d4. Of course, using the pin. Rook d8, takes, king takes. And it looks like I castle queenside, but my rook's still on h1. So we bring the rook into the game. White has the queenside majority over here in a better structure, which makes white just a little bit better, even though it's opposite color bishop, same amount of material. Rook c8 and g3 here. And apparently, Engine says that this is already +2. Just the fact that black has a worse structure. And I have, obviously a better structure. Piece may be a little bit better. This bishop might be more relevant than this bishop here. Well, white is just better, says the Engine. h6, queen c5 hits a7. a6, not today. Rook to d6, not really threatening this, but of course just being an annoying piece right here on the square. Queen to b7. Okay, a4, gain some space. Rook b8, which hits b2. We won't allow that. So bishop d4, which defends the b2 pawn. Queen b4. blunder in a way, and it says it's +3. Crazy. After trades, well, b3 holds everything together. This pawn is very weak. It's hard to even defend it. Besides bishop d5, which also hits the bishop as well. But c4, nice find here from Henry Dang. And after e3, pawn takes bishop, takes and then takes and takes. And this is a clearly winning endgame. After c takes d5, b4, king f8, b5, and a resignation in the endgame here. Because after a takes b5, we have a5, a6, a7. And of course, that's going to be queening and meaning, right? Because the king is not able to catch it. In fact, if we draw the box here for my endgame, people that know how to draw the box, the king is not able to step inside of this box in time to be able to catch the pawn. So Henry Dang goes on to win that one. And last game of the round here is Tani versus Andrew Jiang. Let's see what happened. Knight f3, d5, and Tani goes with b3 again. Been working for him before. He said, I'll try it again. c5, e3, bishop to b2, and the g6 variations, which is sort of, King's Indian-ish or Grunfeld-ish, especially with the pawn being here on d5. So c4 is what Tani chooses here to try to isolate the pawn, or at least create some chances. D takes c4, bishop takes c4, all theory so far. Bishop d7, castles, and d4. We attack the pawn, and after pawn takes, knight takes. Sort of symmetrical in a way, or at least even symmetrical with the pawn structure, we should say, as pawns are the same, but the pieces are what's different, which you still can create some plans and fun things to happen in the game due to the symmetrical pawn structure, but the piece placement is different. a6 wanting to go b5, so of course we stop that with a4. Bishop g4 hits the queen, bishop to e2, and we go back. Takes, nice little trade. e5 kicks the knight back. We now attack the knight. He attacks my knight again, and move it to e5 into the center of the board with rook d1 to follow. Queen c7, okay, I'll hit you there because you left the d5, I'll go to the c. Queen to e7, knight around to c4 with bishop a3 being next. Queen e6, a lot of queen moves. Rook back to d1. Put it where I wanted to put it anyway. Maybe not back to, rook d1. Knight d7, and now I develop knight c3. A knight to c5, which hits b3, but here come the tactics. Rook to d6, and queen g4 is a blunder. Blunder because immediately it loses a piece, loses material. In fact, as rook takes f6, found by Tani here. Tactics, because after queen takes e2, knight takes e2 because the bishop defends the rook. But black does get some stuff for it as b5, makes the knight move away. Knight a5, and then bishop c3, which is a brilliant move here. What it is a great move because it stops rook to d2. Rook d3, and Tani plays rook c1. Another brilliant move. So now if you take the bishop, I'll end up taking and taking. After double the rooks, another brilliant move, g4, which is nice. It also gets the king off the back rank with king g2. So there is a trade of rooks now. King moves up to g2, takes, rook to d2, which hits the knight. We go knight g3. Of course, they did want a takes b5 here, which is hard to find, and then b6 and some other stuff here. But knight to g3 is very normal. Takes, not allowing that pawn to be passed. Knight to c4 and rook takes and knight around to d2, keeping pressure on this pawn. So bishop d4 will be next and trying to grab this pawn. Bishop d4, knight e6, not really letting him take the bishop. So we'll go bishop e5. Now, if you go back with the knight, I have a simple check. Take the knight, then take the pawn. So we end up taking the pawn. King f3, this pawn we need to keep an eye on. Rook moves around, bishop check, and also keeping an eye on the e8 file, just in case the pawn wants to keep moving. Knight f6, knight e8, h4, knight f6, knight around, and of course sometimes repeating, but bringing the bishop to e5, bishop d6, moving the knight out of the way. These three pieces, being minors, are stronger than the knight and the rook here, but it has to be some precision, and of course we do have the extra piece, waiting for black to make some type of mistake. Rook to c6, bishop back to a3 with bishop b2 being an idea, so stopped by Andrew. Knight to c3, Engine didn't like it too much, they wanted a bishop to d6 to go back, but hey, remember, we are playing practical chess, not what the engine plays all the time. Knight to c3, f5. End up taking, and then knight around to b5. Maybe knight d6 being the next option to attack the f5 pawn. Rook to d2 hits the knight. We defend, move away. No way to skewer the knights because the bishop is defending. Knight around to c4, knight e5. Knights are very tricky. Rook c2, knight takes a5. Bishop around to h4, which defends the pawn. We now don't have to worry about any more pawns that black may be trying to use to queen. As black has these two pawns left, we have three pawns and the pieces, and the king is a little weird over here. So rook to d2, knight coming around to c6, bringing the knight back in the game somehow. f4, knight back to d4, forcing a trade in a way, or just wanting to trade. Knight g7 is definitely a move, but that allows us to go knight e2 over to f4 with a mating net, believe it or not. So knight g5 check happens, but after h takes g5, there was a resignation, and Tani wins this game. Some decisive ones, and we had our first draw out of 3 rounds. Awesome chess and exciting. Now let's move to round 4. Here we are with round 4 of the 2025 U.S. Cadet Championship. Let's see what happens in these incredible games. In this game, this is Tani versus Brian, and what happens here is a crazy game. e4, c5, knight f3, e6, and d4 takes. Knight f6, knight c3, knight c6. So sort of timing off is 4 knights, you know, all these. Which one is this one? 4 knights. It's like 100 different Sicilians. But, of course, another Sicilian here. Knight to b5, d6, and after bishop f4, e5, bishop g5, a6. This is actually transposition in, did he even say it? Now it's Sveshnikov, correct. Now, Sveshnikov, Sicilian by transposition. Lots of Sicilians can transpose into others, and this one is no different. So b5, this is all theory here. We are now into a Sveshnikov Sicilian. So bishop e7 takes, c3, and bishop to g5, this is about getting the bishop off of fire here with knight takes f6, and we want to keep the bishop pair. Is what we have right now. So after knight c2, rook to b8, which is still theory, a4 takes, knight takes, pawn takes, castles takes, and a5, which is a nice move. If rook takes a5, there's actually the school move rook takes b4. And if pawn takes, then there's rook takes b2, which is all theory. So h4, which hits the bishop back to h6, b5, bishop d7, and the game gets quite wild here. After knight to c3, still following some theory, d5, still a theory move. Pawn takes, e4, still following theory. Bishop e2, f5, and now d6. Now it gets a little bit wild here after queen to f6. Right, wanting to maybe push f4, e3. Also just developing the queen. If knight d5, we will take on b2. Sorry, knight d5. We can take on b2. We also could take the annoying pawn on d6. So g3, we get king h8 because you can just feel the uncomfortable pressure here with the queen or something on the light squares. After castles, g5. There it is. The dark squares we own. Of course, we have the dark square bishop. So why not push g5, try to open up the king. Pawn takes, queen takes, with, of course, ideas of rook g8, f4. It looks good for black. But rook to c4, saying I have my own good things as well. Even queen d4 check at the right moment, but got to watch out for bishop to g7. Rook to g8, lining everything up on the g file here. Rook to c7 hits the bishop. Rook to d8. Queen d4 check, bishop g7, which hits the queen. Queen moves over to c5, and this gets incredibly complicated after rook e8. Queen a7, putting pressure on the bishop. We move it away. This is not hanging because we are defending. So rook to e7. I'm looking for some trades. Queen g6 is what was played by Tani. Just trying to avoid the trade here. And if it takes, then I'll take back either the queen or the rook. But definitely queen looks a little bit better because b6 is looking like some passed pawns here that are quite scary for white. Queen to c5, question mark here. Engine wanted after takes. They wanted to do something with b6, in fact, and b7, which is natural. Queen to c5, though, rook back over to g8, not allowing rook takes anymore. b6, these pawns are getting very, very, very annoying. Very scary pawns here. b6 and d6 are really strong pass pawns. So rook to c8, attack the queen. Rook c7, blocking. f4, I'm going for it, says Tani. Bishop h5, I step out of the way. Here we go, it gets wild. Knight takes e4, I grab a pawn. The engine says that was not the move. b7 was better. Pass pawns must be pushed. But he was worried about the annoying move set black can possibly play. So knight takes c4, makes total sense. Rook to f8, b7. That pawn is close to queening, but not just yet. Tani says rook f5 to be able to attack the queen. And here we go. This is where it gets wild. d7, huge blunder here, saying don't know what's going on in here. Actually, as this is just insanity right now. Sacrifices the queen, and then the follow-up is wrong. Bishop d4. What a swing of the eval bar. The best move here was actually hard to spot, but maybe not the hardest to spot, but f takes g3. Of course, Tani even having 40 seconds here on the clock. F takes g3, followed by queen h5 with a queen h2 threat, and bishop d4 coming too as well. But you have to see this. You have to calculate this ahead of time. Also, not enough time to calculate as well. So knight takes c5, bishop d4 with idea of rook takes g3, which is hitting mate next, queen h5. So we have a queen here, or sorry, rook c8, which stops the move rook takes g3. Queen to g5, or redoing it, actually, threatening queen takes g3. Takes, taking with the bishop. So now if a queen happens, which does happen, It allows a perpetual. Queen takes g3, king h1, queen h3 check. We're thinking it's a draw. Queen g3. Then he goes queen h4, losing. What is going on? How is it losing? After king g2, queen g5 check, he has to go king f3 and bring his king out into the middle of the street, and is absolutely winning here. Who is ever going to do this? This is absolutely chaos. What is going on? And apparently white is winning here in all lines. This is incredible. But of course, you cannot blame him for not going for this and putting his king on h1. So queen takes, and after checks, a barrage of checks here. Guess what, guys? We have ourselves a draw. There it is. Incredible. Wow. Lots of topsy-turvy, moves there that ends in a draw. Incredible way to start round 4. Here we go. Andrew versus Henry here. Starts with knight f3, and again, b3. This has just been the opening of the tournament. So bishop b2, e6, and he goes for the double fianchetto setup as he's done before. d3, knight d2, c4, a3, queen c2, all natural moves. After knight e5, couple trades. Then more trades after b4, more trades. Queen, more trades. Knight b3, hit the pawn. More trades. Okay, knight a5. Wait. More trades. Takes, offers a draw, and accepted. Nothing to see here. Just very strong players going for an easy game. Offered a draw. It was accepted. Game's over. In this game, we have Linksy Zoo versus Julian. e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, takes, knight f6, a bishop to d3, and again, some type of 4-knight Sicilian here. After takes, bishop f4 developing, knight d2 defends the pawn, castles, and plays c4. Theory here, but also a way to just play chess. To get your pieces out, play c4 and e4, figure out what you want to do with your queen, and see what black does, and we react to it. Castles, queen over to e2, bishop a6, which develops more pieces, rook to c1, which puts something on the c file here. So queen to b6 and b3, rook e8, h4, I like it. Ideas of h5 and h6, sometimes even g4 or g5. So h5 stops all of that. e5 attacks the knight. Knight moves around to g4. h4 is hanging, so g3 is defending it. Bishop c5, putting pressure on f2. King g2, just to be able to play f3 too. g6, knight around to f3. Dark squares slightly weak, but we can deal with it. King to g7, knight around to g5. Rook over to d8 as we just develop our pieces. Make sure everything's nice and smooth. Knight to h3, not the best move, says the engine. They said rook c to e1, which is like, what does that even do? But knight h3 makes total sense, as you probably want something like bishop g5 and maybe reroute the knight over to f4. So rook to e1, bishop takes. Now, of course, we have maybe some targets on the c file, especially after doubling the rooks. Rook to d4, looking to trade, so we get our trade off, and then we go f3 to kick this knight, which is quite annoying. Knight moves around to h6, and now we have some ideas. Bishop takes, we go knight to g5, a very strong piece here, and it gets a little bit tactical after queen e4 with ideas of things like this. So queen does go over to f4. Engine says better was g4, very possible. Queen f4, very human-like, hitting f6. So g4, again, is a move. Queen f6 is what they wanted, followed by g4, but you can't blame them for playing g4 either. Both are accurate moves and practical. g4, rook h8, looking to defend. Queen f6 check, king to g8, rook e4 with the diabolical threat of knight takes e6 and rook takes g4 if h takes g4. And that's actually what happens in the game. H takes g4, knight takes e6, g takes f3, and king to f1. No more checks for black. So now after takes on e6, queen takes g6 check, queen went over to g7, we takes, and then rook g4 with ideas of, queen f5, hitting the queen, queen f7 if the queen goes too far, queen g6 being made if the queen moves away, right? Like, there's just everything. So rook g4 happens, and now the queen is gone here, where white is able to convert after the next few moves. e6, with e7 coming, e7 anyway, and after bishop takes, there's a check, king moves, queen takes e7, and a resignation, as Linksy is able to win that one. So last game of the round was Rose versus Adjanaya Rayo. After e4, c5, knight c3, knight c6, we have bishop b5, knight to d4, which hits the bishop, knight f3, and a6. Bishop d3, g6, castles, and bishop to g7. Rook to e1, e6, e5, queen c7, and here it goes. It's going to get tactical. After b3, knight takes f3, takes, bishop takes e5, d6, and here we go. Rook takes e5. Whoa, what is going on? What a sacrifice. sacrificing that strong bishop on g7, or at least the dark squares, that is. So after takes, rook comes around to e1, f6, which bolsters the center, knight e4, which hits the pawn here. Queen e7 defends everything. Bishop a3, and here come the tactics. f5, knight takes c5, e4. I'm getting a piece out of this, says white. So bishop, or says black. Bishop takes, knight takes, and queen takes a3. Black is up a piece, but white says I have some compensation. Queen c3 hits that rook. Look at that in the corner. Bishop d7 takes and castles queenside. In fact, actually, white was able to grab 2 pieces here, right? All right. After rook takes c5 takes, f6, queen e7. Grab the bishop, and then grab the other bishop. So both the bishops there. So actually up 2 pieces here, in fact, if we count it. Queen c3, getting 1 back with the rook. Bishop d7, snatch the rook, castle queenside, and I'm out of the woods here. But what white needed to do is grab more material. So like grab, at least get all the pawns if I'm going to give up some pieces here. Queen c3 allows bishop c6, which now this is a very strong bishop. And after knight to c5, rook d5 hits the knight. Knight takes e6, queen around to e7. d3, queen f6, looking for trades. Queen to b4. Rook e5, we're now, Rose is just looking to trade. I'm up material. And that's it, basically, from there, is what she's saying. Takes, check. I go king d7. I would love to snatch the knight here. Knight check first, but I just step away. You have back rank problems. He deals with them. And then knight to f6. Queen f7 check. King b6. Knight e4. Knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes c4, and this is just pretty easy now. Actually, okay, it wasn't easy. In fact, from here, this actually was not easy. It still took some conversion after check, and you have to watch out for the pawns. So Rose was able to convert here after checking. 40 seconds left on the clock too as well. You need to be able to get the queen involved, bring the bishop around, and bring the king over to this side of the board, which was able to be done. King d8. Bishop d7, pushing the pawn, but I'm going to walk my king over and use all of my pieces. Use this as a decoy as well. Check. Bringing the queen back, gain a little bit of time. I get 30 seconds. Check. Bring the queen around. Do you want to trade? My bishop will be on the right diagonal. Bring the king around. Now the king can help with the pawns. Check. I take 1 with check. I go check again, and my next move will be check, trading off the queens, winning this pawn, and winning the game as well. Wow, what a round. Crazy stuff once again, but we still have more chess to go. Let's take a look at round 5. Welcome, guys, to the 2025 U.S. Cadet Championship, and here is round 5. So let's take a look at what happened in round 5 here. We have Anjanaya Rayo versus Brian Lynn. So let's see what happened. E4, C5. Knight to c3, knight c6, bishop b5, knight d4, knight to f3, a6, which hits the bishop. Bishop back to d3, g6, castles, and bishop g7. Rook e1, knight f6, takes, all equal so far. This hitting the pawn, obvious stuff. So queen to b6. I like the e5 variations myself, but queen to b6. And after takes, there is obviously some pressure down the diagonal, but it can be easily parried with bishop e3 at the right moment. b2 will be hanging, so you got to be careful with that one. So, all right, a4, knight to g4, which hits f2, and rook to f1, d6, h3, knight goes back, not to f6, but just backing up, hitting d3. f4 still can't be played yet, obviously because of the diagonal. This bishop wants to go e3 at the right moment. b2 is hanging in many cases. So bishop e3, allowing queen takes b2. Doesn't go for it. Queen takes b2 actually runs into some perpetual type stuff like this because the queen's kind of trapped. So doesn't happen. Not going for it. Bishop e3. Queen back to c7. a5. b5 will be answered with en passant. Maybe even taking the bishop pair is possible for us. We could go bishop e6 or knight to c4. Bishop e6 played. Knight to f4. We could take this. Big fan of, obviously grabbing the bishop pair. I do like the c4 square that we have lots of pieces on. Brian goes with bishop c4, which is a nice move. Knight d5. I'll take those. And I'll take those. And of course, we have same color bishop. This sort of reminds me of a Sicilian accelerated dragon. You have some positions like this where white actually gets a lot of space. And this d5 pawn is actually annoying because this is sort of a backward pawn in a way for black. But still playable. Lots of play to be played, like right, rook e8, rook c8, trade the queens. Black should be fine. Going e5, getting rid of the backward pawn. not take. En passant does not. En passant would actually allow these pawns to be weak. Maybe white could play in this manner. But goes bishop b6 instead, which hits the queen. Queen moves away. c4, f5, e4, or f4 type of ideas. Rook e8. I like these positions from black's standpoint. I'm able to maybe create some stuff, but I need more pieces. So in fact, still equal. g5. Engine didn't like this too much because of b4. They actually just like e4, as you see here behind me. But b4, it was played after g5 and queen a4, hitting the pawn here. White is slightly better, but you actually remember we're playing humans here. You want to be practical. c5, rook f7, takes. Bishop back to f8, which hitting the pawn. b4 is also hanging as well, so defends both with bishop c5. Queen comes back to d7 to attack d6. We end up taking h6. You can't actually snatch this yet, obviously, because it's defended. Also, rook e7 at the right moment. Queen defends f5, though, so be careful. Bishop takes. If this rook is here, this will fall. So you have to be careful. Queen to c3. Queen over to c7. King h1. Got some shuffling. As you see, king gets to g6. This is scary because of g4. Got to be careful here. No problem there, random person. Glad I can help you there. On Twitch, I see you in chat. Okay, so rook f7, which actually defends the f5 pawn, takes, and the engine didn't like this. They wanted actually, I think, taking, and also h4, which is a hard move to spot. But after takes, and moving the queen over, I'm defending everything. d6 happens, capture, e4. There are tricks with rook takes. In fact, you're actually just losing. So queen comes back to c4. Queen takes on d6. Trade everything out. Trade everything out. 4 pawns. They still play it out, though, as this is all rooking games are drawn, as they say, basically. Rook check, probably a draw offer here. Game is over. That one ends in a draw. Let's go back. That's round 5 with a draw there. You have Rose versus Ling Zhu in the draw as well. In this game, e4, c5, knight c3, and the g3. These are sort of the closed Sicilian type of games. I am a fan of this from white side. g6, sort of a copy. Knight e2, I like this because you go quick f4, g4 castle stuff. a3, not necessary, but a3 does not, it stops before, it still can be played, but it at least helps us open the a5. e6, castles, bishop e3, there's f4 still being playable, but right now we're actually attacking the bishop. Or sorry, the pawn. Bishop is attacking the pawn. Knight d4, rook b1, we want to go b4, right moment. There it is, b4, f4, very aggressive, you know, queen d2 type stuff, f5, h3, g4. I've won a lot of games like this with white. Queen d2, knight to d1. Engine doesn't like it too much. They actually like knight to c1. Like, that is ridiculous. Ridiculous. Bishop f2, very playable too as well. Like, but knight d1 is fine from a human standpoint. Now knight c1. Look at the knights here. The reroute of the knights. We have takes, and d5 and e5. Look at this bishop on a8. That is a very, very bad bishop. After knight f5, takes, c3, which hits the knight. Knight goes back to c6 and d4. Nice structure here. One of the things that we noticed about Rose is her positional understanding is really making good positional moves. And this bishop is trapped for a very long time. But also, on the contrary here, this bishop's kind of doing the same. You can't really break through. Besides this here, g4, f5. And black's going to maybe try f6 here. But let's see what happens. After the a5 move, knight to b3, knight squares for the pieces. a4, pass pawn. Engine says white is already better. But, of course, it's not by much. 1.5, 1.4, whatever. The engine swings a lot. And you are playing, you know, practical chess, playing a human. So, queen to e7, knight e3. Now I'm looking for g4, f5. h5 happens, and queen over to d3. Knight a7. We have h3. Black breaks with f5. Saying, I'm not going to allow you to do it because this was just, you know, automatic. So black does it. En passant, which is forced, but it's actually not, believe it or not. Queen takes g6 is coming, so taking with the rook, defending everything. g4 can be played, but miss. Not really miss. I mean, it's still possible. Just bringing another piece into the game. Queen f7 and queen e2 here. Missing the g4 push again. g4 is actually hard to spot because rook takes f4 is a thing. After takes, knight takes e6. Definitely something to go for. There's just a lot of weaknesses for blacks in black's camp here. This is something that Rose missed in this game. So she goes for queen e2. g4 finally played, but a little bit different now. It's slightly different. slightly different. So actually, in fact, rook takes f4 still runs into same stuff. Takes, 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 takes. Playable. Playable. In the game, though, knight d6 happened. g5. Rook takes, takes, takes. Takes, takes. So she finally goes for it. Queen g3. The knight's a little bit more active than it was before. There also is no queen takes g6. Queen is here now, and the rook is actually, you know, on pre if you move the queen. Queen f2. Everything looks even, especially with this knight coming in e4. You probably want to get rid of that. Knight takes c3 is going to be annoying. We still have the pass a pawn as well. Bishop takes, takes. King over to e2. Locking it down. Bishops are very sharp pieces and very annoying in open positions. This is sort of not open yet, but if it does, these bishops will be menacing. Rook e8 hits the knight. We move away. King d2, rook e2. Gets the king around to be able to capture the pawn. Rook's going to take this one. d5, counterplay. You're going to let me queen? Not today. King b2. Takes, tactics, but I can just take this one. Bishop moves away first. It's hanging. This is hanging too. Hit the rook, the pawn, same time. Push. I mean, still some tactics here. Still played very tactical, both players here. Rook f8 defends everything. Bishop comes back around, and then they start to trade some stuff off. These bishops get kind of scary. Bishops versus knights, as we see in the next round, actually. Rook takes. Knight f3. Rook f4. Right, and actually in this one's actually interesting because black has the pawns versus the pieces. So white's technically winning. Technically. Not the easiest, though. We have some shuffles of the pieces. I get another pawn. Rook and two knights versus black and the pawn with the pawns. Yeah, practically very hard to play. No mating net. If you move the king, obviously you're getting mated. Rook g8, and then I think you go knight c to d8 or something like that. Some kind of weird mating net. But we have a rook, which is capturing these pawns, or using these pawns and capturing this one. Push, push. As we see, pawns come off, making this one a draw. Now, when you reach this position, rook and knight versus rook, this actually is a theoretical draw. Still want to probably play it out, but it is a draw. You can play this out for 50 moves. Yeah, you just play it out. Play it out, check. Keep the king and the rook far away because the knight can't check and fork. That is the idea. You see it was played out, and you just get no progress because the rook is far enough. This is very nice technique here from Rose, or from Linksy with the draw, but also Rose trying to create something. She still played it out as you should. As you should. 51. Look at how guys are on move 119 here. 120. Grinding. And of course, probably 50 moves or shake hands, whatever. This is a draw. This is a draw here. Very nice game. 2 draws in round 5. As we move up, round 6 is going on still. Round 6 is still going. But in round 5 here, 2 draws, as we just looked at with Brian Lynn and Anjanaya Rayo. Rose, Atwell, Linksy, Zoo with a draw. Then we have 2 wins. Julian and Andrew. Looks like Andrew wins in this game with the black pieces. Let's see what happens. So d4, knight f6, c4, g6, d5. You got a Grunfeld. Takes, takes, knight a4. It's a fancy variation here. Lots of ways to play this one. Goes with the c5 move, question mark, but of course there's just a lot of ways to play this variation. You can go bishop g7, you can go knight b6, you can go e5, you can go all these other moves. Knight c6 is another one too. But c5, rare, very rare. Knight f6, which hits the pawn, knight f6 hit to actually attack the pawn. Knight takes, e5. If pawn takes, obviously queen d1, followed by bishop c5 and knight e4 in a lot of cases here. Scary stuff can happen, but tactics everywhere already. Grunfeld is a sharp opening. Bishop e5 check, knight d7. Fix the camera first. We're back. What's going on? What's up, chat? It says, what are perks? What's up? Yeah, you know that's one thing. Definitely. And you have prime too, so you can use your prime. Knight d7, knight b3, bishop b4 check. Actually, they didn't like this, believe it or not. Knight d7 was answered with knight e2. What? It's insane. Let's refresh though. Yeah, I would actually go knight c6 or bishop d7, to be honest. But okay, knight f to d7. Knight b3, bishop b4 check, bishop d2. Snatch the piece, trades, and castles. This is generally what we need to do. Get castles. Sometimes this bishop's gone a lot. a6, b5, bishop b7, knight c6, general plan. Knight b6 wasn't like too much from the engine, but who cares, right? a6, b5. We're going to play practical chess. Knight b6, we do want to trade queens, which is something you have in an in-game lots of times with the Grunfeld, these in-games, right? 3-6 versus 3-4-5, so black is actually down a pawn. Happens a lot in Grunfeld in-games. You are sort of down a pawn, trying to fight, get the pawn back, sometimes create some initiative. Knight e4, which hits the b2 pawn. Rook to d1, rook e8, which is hitting this pawn. I can get this back, but it will trap my knight, so I don't want to do that. So b5, keep the knight here, quite annoying. Knight a5, which allows black to get some type of chances, starting with knight takes b2 and come right back around at the right moment. Knight d7, there is some rook takes c8 type ideas, which is played right now. Takes, I get a piece, but there's a check, bishop f1. Maybe I can take this pawn too as well. Now I have these. This could be weak. I can start pushing these. I also have a pin. Let me move this. Like this. Wrong arrow. Too many arrows. But these pawns are quite annoying. You can also try to win this. Like this, something like this. Obviously, maybe try to dislodge this too to be able to use this. Yeah, we have the extra piece or the 2-for-1. You know, I have the rooks, but you have the bishop and knight. I definitely like black in these type of positions. This is dynamic. You even have rook a4 as a main threat right now. But watch out, obviously, for knight b3. Played. Rook moves away. Now we have a trade. This pawn is going to be annoying to try to defend. Knight c3. We push these pawns. Seems like a clear plan for black. Rook b4. Grab one of the pawns. Rook b1. Knight c3 to e2. Gonna be scary for white. b4. Pushing away. Rook b2, hit both. Take, hit this one, and takes. Okay, cool. Rook takes f2, and now this is equal. A very strange position that we have here, guys. 3 pawns, rook and knight versus the minors, and 2 pawns. Let's see what happens. Bishop d3, we go rook f3. Of course, there's lots of ideas, but if bishop e2, we just go rook to b3 to be able to take this way. Or likely to be some type of draw, maybe. Check. Little shuffle. Let's see where black was able to create some chances. We were able to grab one of the pawns that white messed up, be able to grab one of these pawns. Now we have 3 versus 2 with the minors, and I have a rook. Could be playing for more, which of course happens in this game. Knight b3, rook c4 hits the bishop. a4, rook a3 ideas. There it is. King g7, get out of the pen. Push and use the pawns. This is also a weakness as well. Move around. Look at that, but easily defended. Bring the knight around. Take. Engine actually wanted rook a1, but okay. This is sort of fine for me as a human playing practical chess to attack this pawn. Knight b7 attacks the rook. I can go rook a1. Now this is hanging, but of course g4 can be played once again. Not played at all. f5 played maybe to defend. Obviously f7 too was hanging. So check. King moves around. Taking of the pawn. Engine does not like this. King g5. Wow, that's interesting. Maybe because knight f7. They want knight f7 here. Black's still better though. Now I have 3 pawns here. 3 pawns. This is going to be hard. 2 minors or 3 minors versus 3 pawns. A very interesting type of imbalance, I should say. Rook check here. You also have rook check here. Well, rook check. This check actually runs into king f2. But king f4, g5 check, running the king around, and the pawns start pushing. That's what you do in games, is try to queen one of the pawns quickly. Check. Everything's defended. Move the rook away. Don't get forked by any of the knights or skewered by a bishop. Still got to be careful and cautious. King f6, check. Moving the king around. I got 3 pawns here. Should be enough to do it as long as I don't hang anything. And sometimes I can even sacrifice when the pawns get close enough. There it is. Sacrifice. Says, I'm going to win this. I have the 2 extra pawns versus your knight. Here we go. And the game is over. After the knight check, it must have been a resignation here. But there's no way you were stopping this one. We also have an extra pawn too as well. So 2 draws, 2 decisive results in round 5 as round 6 is still going on. With 1 game, Brian Lynn looks to be winning in round 6. And here is the final game of round 5, which is Tani versus Henry Dang. So This game was awesome here. In fact, a very crazy game. Sicilian that Tony likes to play. And in this one, he went with the knight c6 Sicilian instead of the e6 Sicilians that he's generally playing. But after bishop b5, knight to d4, which hits the bishop. Knight f6, a6, hit the bishop again. And then e6. So sort of a Tomanov that he's used to playing, but instead with the knight on d4. Brings the knight back to c6. And knight d5, by the way, this move is really strong. Ideas here are actually like takes, putting the rook on e1. With using this pawn to come into d6. So really cool stuff with this knight d5 idea. Tony plays g6, bishop g7. Now knight e7 will be a thing and push d5. Knight e7, d5 played, takes. And then queen to c2. Castles, bishop f1, d4. We grab some central space already. This game gets quite tactical. After knight c4, bishop f5 hits the queen, d3. Takes, bring a knight into the center, hitting the c3 pawn with the knight and the bishop at the same time. So bishop to b2, knight to f4. Engine doesn't like this. In fact, they wanted b5, which makes a lot of sense. Knight f4 makes sense too as well, though. It is attacking the d3 pawn. We got 3 pieces on d3. So rook d1, natural defense, defending. Bishop g4, hit the knight, damage the structure. Knight d2, defending the structure. Very logical moves here. Queen a5, maybe to bring the rook over to d8, hit a2. Believe it or not, you can snatch this pawn and run away. Rook to e4, which hits the knight. Not going to give it up, obviously, so queen moves back to c7. But at least we get the queen off the back rank. g3, and then we have this nice check. I would love to get this bishop pair. So king to g2, f5, defending by attacking at the same time. f4, really strong, so now black has what we call initiative, which equals time and activity. Bishop e2, rook to e8, really strong stuff. May even see sacrifices on e2. So knight e4, blocking the file. Engine doesn't like this. They like a d4 or even bishop a3, which hits this pawn, but not a likely move to be playing. Knight e4 is more likely. Just try to be active and also block the file. Rook f7. In fact, the best move was queen f7, which is like, okay, makes sense. I mean, with bishop takes f3 and fg3. Rook f7, though, makes a lot of sense. h6 stops knight to g5 because this was a mean and annoying pin. Bishop a3 hits this pawn twice now. Bishop to e6, back the queen up. g5, here come the pawns. g4, scary stuff. Here we go. Now here come the tactics. After f3, knight e7, takes, knight d5. Brilliant move here with knight e3 being the idea. Very strong. So knight moves around to f1, and here come the more tactics. f3. After takes, rook takes f3, because if king takes f3, you have queen to f7. And then there's a devastating attacks here. Actually, after queen f7, king g2, you have bishop takes g4, which is like hard to defend all this stuff. You also have rook takes e4 to follow as well. So very scary. Now, after rook takes, bishop takes g4, queen to f7, knight d2, rook takes e4, a brilliant move, double brilliant in a way. Bishop g4 was nice because after king takes, you have knight to g1, actually, which is really strong. Knight g1 controls the squares. Now the king cannot get back into the game. Really strong stuff here. Very scary for white. So refresh. Bishop takes g4. King moves back to g2. And after queen f7, we have queen f3. Coming up next, also rook takes e4 in the right moment. Knight d2 defends f3. Rook takes e4. Really strong. Really strong. Because if knight takes, there's queen to f3. And if pawn takes, you have queen f2. If rook takes, you have queen f2. So pawn takes, queen f2 check, king h1, and here we go. Bishop f3, which is really strong. Also, you have knight e3 as well. Bishop f3 takes, and we just win the queen here. So now the rest is just technique. After bishop takes, queen takes c3, hitting both of these at the same time. Knight f4 check, nice. Because I win a pawn, not only that, I'll be able to check the king up the board, as we see here, bring the knight around, so the king cannot take any of my pieces. And then I'll take the bishop. Now, 3 versus 3. King is out here in the middle of the street, as we like to say. Very strong stuff. Right check, knight e3, knight check again. And, of course, black is just converting. h5 there. Converting. Let me fix the camera again. All right. Amy Chess, thanks for the follow as well. Louisa, black up a queen, bishop. Yes, exactly. Knight g1 is insane there. Knight g1 is quite insane. So, camera is doing this because of... been here all day, actually. A long day. 4 hours in to the stream and also doing the recap right now. I'll stream with you guys. So we're here. But Tani was able to win this game and convert after the next few moves. Bishop f6, queen a4. Honestly, we're just looking for the conversion, which Tani's looking for, and he's able to do. Tani back to back. That's right. DG wrote. Exactly. We're just doing a recap here, putting this on for the guys on YouTube watching right now. So you're part of the YouTube recap right now. This is actually round 5 of the recap. And in fact, since we're here, might as well look at round 6 as well. Round 7 actually is coming up. So we'll do a recap as we'll do round 5 and 6. So let's take a look at round 6. What happened here? We'll actually start with the first game to finish, which was actually this French game. This game was crazy. So in fact, we're extending the video. This was just going to be round 5 recap, but round 5 and 6, because round 6 is basically almost over. So this was the first game to finish here, and this was crazy. Like, in fact, I used to like the French defense, but not anymore, guys. Not anymore. You better be careful with the black pieces. Here we go. E4, E6, D4, D5. Right, knight E5, C5. Now I'm just finishing 5th grade. Whew, that's crazy. Very strong. C3, knight C6, knight F3, queen B6, and bishop D3. So now pawn takes. This is, thank you, Louisa. Thank you. So now pawn takes. This is actually the Milner-Berry gambit. After castles, bishop D7. I actually played this a bunch of times over the board, and only one loss against the international master who I beat before this. But I mean, it wasn't the opening's fault. Yeah. So this is a strong opening, to say the least. Knight B to D2. Now black is up a pawn, but white just gets initiative. A pawn on E5 signifies I should have space. So after rook to E1, defending, knight G6. This is the thing. Engine loves knight to B3, and then rook B1 and queen E2, which defends. Now there is no knight F4 because bishop takes F4. So a lot of good plans here. In fact, Engine wanted H4 here, which is crazy to even spot. Like H4. I was a fan of G3, H4, which is actually what happens in the game. G3, H4, H5 type ideas. F6, which immediately is a problem here. So after takes, C4 opens up the game. The black king is still in the middle of the center, so it's a problem. So after takes, bishop takes. Now, I mean, this is just already bad for black. King in the middle of the board. Now we're going to give back the pawn that we're up. And black says, you know what? I want to keep the pawn. But in fact, they should have just gave it up because can't castle this way. This is usually never happening. C file opening like this. So bishop H6, stuff like bishop G7 is possible as well, but just being annoying in black's position. What's up, Chess Gamer versus Supreme? After bishop F8, takes, there's a knight to H4. Idea, queen H5 check. So bishop E6, which stops that. And we have knight C5 bringing more pieces to the fire. You see the e-bar bar just growing there. Bishop takes, and this position is a disaster for black as rook takes B7 is following up. I mean, this is coming. The king is in the center of the board still. Knight F5, like this is very bad. Be very careful when you play the French defense. So B5, stopping, obviously rook takes B7. So queen comes to the center of the board with ideas of queen F3 and swinging around with this knight to hit F6. Rook A7, rook C1, bringing more pieces to the party. Knight E7, there was no big tactics with this knight, no good discoveries. So queen F3 to bring this knight around to E4 to play knight takes F6. Queen B6, knight E4, going for that same idea. King F7, bring the other rook around. Why? Knight D6 check next. Rook D7, queen check, and then here comes the tactics. Rook takes, and after knight takes G6, sort of a miniature here. Okay, it was only 30 moves, not generally a miniature, but fast game. First one to be done in the French here. French defense was not good for black here. So Linksy was able to win that one. And on to the next game in round 6, which was Andrew Jiang versus Rose Atwell. This was a very cool game. Why? Well, there was some sacrifices. In fact, we'll actually look at it from Rose's point of view. E4, C5, knight F3, D6. D4, take, knight F6, and instead of the knight orf, we have a classical Sicilian. So bishop C4, queen B6, this is the topical line. This is a Sozin, and queen B6 is a nice way to answer the Sozin from the classical variations type of position. After takes, pawn takes, castles, G6, bishop G7. Very easy play. Just going for this stuff. Queen E1, queen back to C7. Very nice. You know, getting out of the way of any tactics or whatever. So bishop F4, knight to D7, bringing the knight around somewhere here or here. Also stopping in E5, which was white's intention. Now bishop G7, we have E5 on lock. Queen to D2, castles, B3. rook to e8, just on normal moves. Bishop h6, wanting to get rid of this and weaken the dark squares. Rose keeps it on the long diagonal. Queen f4, hitting f7, knight e5, defending, attacking, same time. Bishop moves back, queen a5, hit the knight. Knight goes to a4 because it also was hitting a2 at the same time. Not really wanting to give this up. So knight a4, but this knight is not the greatest piece. So c5, maybe bishop d7, maybe bishop a6, maybe knight c6 to d4. Lots of plans. Queen g3, knight c6, aiming maybe a d4. Bishop to c4, bishop a6, getting rid of this very strong piece. Bishop d2, and here we go with knight b4, which is a nice move. Thanks for the prime there. Appreciate it. Randomly person. Appreciate it. So knight b4, put this knight on a very strong square, right? It was also kind of forced too as well, by the way. Queen actually has no squares. So if you do anything else, the queen is actually, you're going to lose a piece because the queen's defending the bishop and it has to get to the safety somehow. So knight to b4. So you're asking, why doesn't a3 work? Well, a3 doesn't work due to bishop takes c4. Remember, you can't hold everything. If pawn takes here, I could just take back. And then when you take, I take and I get a piece back. Everything's fine. Everything's clean. So very nice calculation there from Rose. After bishop takes, there was pawn takes. If queen takes, you do lose material here. If bishop takes a6, let's do that, right? Queen takes, bishop takes a6. So here's what happens is pawn takes. Here's the move, rook to d5. We're like, wait a second. If I move my queen, I lose the bishop. Well, how do I? Oh, I sacrifice it. Queen takes a4. Queen takes a4. Sacrifice. Takes and bishop takes. So now we're getting some material back. Right. And black could be a favorite here. But if white is not accurate. So queen to g4. Maybe queen d7. Try to do what I can because I am not the greatest anymore in this position with the white pieces as black has enough material for the queen's sacrifice. So rook to c8. Very nice. And this is where the weaknesses are. Rook d2. Bishop c3, hit both the rooks. And then I'll take one. And then I'll go back to try to bully the c2 square, even the c file itself. a5, make sure everything is nice and bolstered first. Then go rook c3. Now I have ideas of doubling the rooks first. Take this pawn. Double the rooks. g4, nice move. They're wanting to go g5 here and bully this e7 pawn. So h6, which stops that whole idea. Queen to b5. And of course, from here, they could not find anything. In fact, Rose was actually low on time in this game too, as you see here. So this did not happen. This was a transmission error, I believe, with rook f3. But there was a repetition, which means this ended in the draw. So round 6 is in the books as Linksy wins with French. Andrew and Rose have a draw here. And then in this game, Tani on a tear here. Actually, after playing one of his openings, scoring very well with knight f3, d5, b3. The knight f3, b3 system, just looking to get a game. Bishop b2 and bishop f5. And with these systems, g3 seems to be the go-to. So after g3, bishop g2, black with a reverse London system, as they call this. h6, castles, and d3. Knight d2 is the general way of playing. And after knight d2, you could go e4, rook e1, or even c4 as Tani played in this game. a3, knight to d2, queen c2, bishop c3. Sometimes you're going queen b2, c5, which is really strong. So now queen b2 will be answered with the d4 push. Pawn takes, and e4, right? Okay. e4 happens, a4. And Tani gets in a little bit of trouble here after e5. And then b4. And now knight e1, because this bishop is a menace. Very strong stuff. So Inja definitely is liking how black is playing this. They want to get rid of this knight off the back rank first, which is connecting both of the rooks and etc. So knight to b6 happens, which they say question mark because they wanted knight to c7. Knight b6, bishop d4. This is a must-play move, by the way, in a way. I guess they have knight df3, so you do have another move. But d4 was black's intention. So bishop d4, trying to untangle. Queen c3 would be next to get off of this diagonal. Pawn takes. Instead of taking back, which would be a very bad move because rook to c8, kind of annoying. Gets so much pressure, once again being in the pin. Tani goes with queen to a2, which hits d5. Knight c4, nice tactical move. Because now after knight takes c4, which is possible, we could go rook d1, but there's problems with taking this pawn due to, of course, obviously the queen hitting the bishop, but rook c8 brings this queen into some problems. So he goes rook d1. And then a maneuver I spotted in the game, which was knight to b1. I saw this was probably a pretty nice maneuver here to maneuver the pieces around, which is what happens. Knight c7, knight takes d3, And things start to get a little bit tactical here after bishop a1. Knight moves around to f4, hit the d5 pawn. d4, blocking, also maybe hitting e5 as well. Rook e1, because this is hanging, and maybe play e6. Bishop takes b1, and rook takes, believe it or not, was actually the better move than what was played in the game, because the follow-up is, well, why the bishop takes anyway was because the sequence of taking and hit on a3. So takes, hit a3. Here is there's e6, and after takes, bishop h3, which is just like ridiculous type of files here. And if takes, you still have the same type of idea, e6, or rook bd1 followed by e6. But in the game, Tani played a more human, practical way, which is taking with the queen to reroute it to a different square. And then bishop h3, the stuff starts to get quite tactical here. e6 happens, and then bishop takes f5. Idea, bishop h7, knight g6, picking up some type of stuff. Takes, and he doesn't take on e1. In fact, he goes knight to c2. Julian does, which allows tactics to happen. And rook e5 starts with the knight being hit. Knight d6 hits the queen. Queen comes back into the game. And the knight to c4, which hits the rook. So we move it away. Rook d7 coming with mate. What happens next? Bishop d6 hits this knight. e7, tactics everywhere. If bishop takes, you have a knight h5 at the very least, or queen e6 check. If queen takes, obviously the rook is hanging. So bishop takes, queen e6 check. Check again. Now I'm picking up the knight, and this one is basically over now. Queen takes the knight. Now there's a nice tactic. Okay, I get something back, says black, but I am down a piece still. Queen d3. I take something. When you find a good move, you look for a better one. So queen takes d4. All the threats you see with the arrows here. Queen g7 is mate. Bishop f6, hoping for a capture here because there is mating possibilities. Takes here and mate, weirdly enough. So check. You do everything with check here. After king g8, check again. King here and check, and a resignation due to the file being like this. Knight g5, and look at this maneuver here, which is pretty nice. Knight h7 mates. And then king h8, you have rook h7 or bishop f6, really doesn't matter. But after knight e6, there was a resignation, and Tani goes on to win this game. Final game of the round here, round 6, which was draw-like. Actually, Brian ends up getting a much-needed win in this game with e4, c5, knight f3, e6, g3, going with the more positional type of Sicilian. Takes, and d4. Then that looks like something from a d4 opening, but this is an isolated pawn, so something we can play on for the entirety of the game. Well, unless, black's able to give it up or push it or do something about it. So bishop g2, knight around to e2. h3, takes, and then we have the structure here of these two pawns that are actually double, but you can use the b file. After rook b1, this pawn was hanging for like 11 moves. Sometime in the game, this pawn was never captured. And we were just talking about this in commentary today, as it was just very funny to see how long this pawn was actually on pre. Castles, rook e8, and g4. As we noticed, the pawn's still not captured. f3, bishop g6, pawn still doesn't get captured. Bishop g5, attacking the knight. Not really, you don't really want to take this. We do want to be uncomfortable. Now it can't be taken, but we can defend our knight because that was the real threat. Check. We could go bishop f2 or king something. He moves the king away. Want to keep the bishop here to take on f6. Rook e6, pawn still can be captured. Not today. So after captures, instead of taking with the queen and allowing bishop takes c2, bishop takes e1 is the better move. Takes here. We can still take this pawn. Not today. Queen d2, maybe bishop f2 being an idea. Now we can't take this pawn anymore. We will never be able to capture that pawn again. So other operations were employed. Bishop h4 trying to hit this knight. g5 really strong, provoking some weaknesses on black's king. Bishop f2, queen c4, knight d3. This could have been a captured pawn, but was not captured. Bishop g6 maybe putting a piece on a better square, and maybe knight h7. h4, breaking down this structure. Rook to e8. Pawn takes, queen takes. Takes. Lots of takes. Knight f4 with knight g6 intentions. So king g7. Also with the intention of my own. Rook h8. Bishop h4. Rook h8 still can be played, and the engine wants king h2 there, which is crazy to go king g3. But queen e5, a practical human choice. After queen takes, knight takes. I was definitely a fan of this with knight takes. And after knight takes, king takes, we have bishop to f1. Bishop f1's idea is to go bishop to d3 check, and the bishops are quite sharp. I actually would prefer the bishops over the knights in an endgame. So rook goes to e3 with ideas of rook a3 also hitting f3. So rook b3, nice move, and no trade. king g2, rook h8 was coming. And the rest here is white actually just pressing with the bishops here. Equal game, but knights versus bishops. So let's see what happens. Rook a3 hits the pawn. White was able to create some stuff. Bishop g3 hits the knight. Rook e3 moving around a little bit. Bishop a6 hits the rook. Bishop e5 hits the knight. We hit the knight again. Knight c5 comes around. We're just putting pressure on the pieces, right? The bishops are just sharper pieces, especially in open positions. So bishop d7, which was an excellent move, bringing the bishop around to a better square. Of course, also threatening to win a pawn in a lot of cases. So rook c7. We go check. Can't win the pawn, but we can make this knight very strange. So a3, because if you go back, I'm going to take and win a pawn. So knight a2. Now the knight is really strange and offsides. Bishop d4 before we go rook e3 so we don't block the bishop in. And then rook e3. Knight moves around, trying to get rid of one of these bishops. Engine says everything's great if you just capture. But, you know, human-wise, no. I like the choice here with bishop e5 to keep the bishops on the board. Rook c4, and we bring our pieces into the party. Just be better with our pieces, improve, and win the game is our goal. d4, rook e1, knight c3, bring the knight back in the game. Check. And I remember watching all of these moves here. Rook e5, g6 was always an idea. This is why rook comes back to really kind of defend against this loosening or damaging of this pawn on f7. a5, bishop back to f8. Engine didn't like this. They just said capture and take everything in games winning. Cool, whatever. Bishop f8, though, I still can play this game with the bishops. And this is where we left, actually, to start doing some of the recap, in fact, that we're doing right now for round 5. So let's see the rest. Let's see what happened. King g4. It was a miss. Apparently, f5 was just winning. Wow. What happens on knight takes? So let's actually see it in real time. Knight takes g5. You go rook e8. Yeah, that's definitely not human. But we get to see it in real time here. That's definitely not human at all. But king g4 is very human, in fact. Because now f5, I can do king takes g5. So takes, that's a pawn. He says I could get one back, but doesn't go for it. Also, the rook was hanging. So bishop f7. Now he takes, allows bishop f7, and look at the bishops here and the passed pawn. Very nice for white. We take, there's knight g2. Maybe I move the bishop away, correct, with tempo. So now I want to push. Pushing, check. Going back towards the rook. There we go, blocking. This is hanging. Rook e6, brilliant move. There it is, that's nice. Rook e6, because after trading, there's a check. Nice. Nice move here. Nice find. This wins the game. Rook e6. Then we queen. And check. Pick up everything. Tactics win games here. Nice. Very nice. And look at this. After taking, you have the right color pawn. Or the right color bishop for the corner. If this happened to be a dark squared bishop, this would be a draw. Even being up a bishop and a pawn. Because you wouldn't be able to get him out of this corner. But now that you have the right color bishop, you can be able to get this guy out of the corner here. So, well, there we go with round 5 and round 6. Round 7 is coming up. So I'll see you guys on the next one. All right, so here we go with round 7's recap. The recap here starts with a bunch of games. In fact, let's actually start with that cool game that we looked at earlier with this one right here from Julian. Julian had an incredible game here. And with Julian's game, he actually won in style, actually, out of the opening, already winning. Sort of prep in a way. e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, takes, and knight f6. Knight c3, knight c6, takes. This is all theory. e5, knight e4. It's very funny. Bishop e2, castles, queen c7, knight d6, takes. And something went wrong here for black after e5 probably just wasn't the move. Even though Engine said it can be played, but it gave white this incredible position already where we actually win a pawn. Even material, or even in piecewise, but the pawn, I have an extra pawn. This is what happened. Right? We obviously get the pieces off the back rank and like develop. Rook defending the pawn. Bishop to e4. Trade after b3 first. And then there was h4. And then there was a trade of bishops. Queen comes back to defend. And after rook d7, rook e2. White's completely winning. Rook e1 with a brilliant move. Sacrificing the queen. Because I'll get 2 for 1. And after takes, the winning move, which was found, is e1. Very simple. Now, after a trade of rooks, look at the domination of the center here, where the queen cannot get back in, really. So the game was just really easy for Julian here, as he was able to check. And look at the king on 2. Crazy game here. Trying to get your queen here, but it's just not possible. Even if you do, I'm able to get out of it, to say the least. Check. King h3, making sure I have some space. And the rest was quite easy for Julian here. Got the check, pushing a pawn. There's nothing you can do about it. I'm going to queen next. You can't take with check. A few more moves were played. Now I have 2 queens on the board. Should be easy and trivial. And after here, queen d4 wins on the spot. Mating ideas and trading of the queen. Very nice. Julian in the last round. Next game here. In fact, we still have a game going, which should be a draw here, I believe. Should be a draw very soon. This is why we're doing a recap so far. With this game still going, because this should be a draw. In fact, Canty has already figured out to check on the behind the king, which will make that a draw. So next game we'll check out is Andrew. This is one of the later games versus Anjanaya. This was knight f3, d5, g3, knight d7. I'm going for this type of setup with bishop f5 too. Pretty topical, especially against these Catalan type setups. a5 stopping a5 from white. e6, trade of the bishops. A very positional grind here. c6, knight f6, castles. Positional grind. e4 is looking to be played at some point. Knight back around the d7. Trade this knight off, which is super annoying. So it's been traded. Queen takes, and we have our rooks are connected. Very nice. Our piece development. Not aggressive, but good chess. c5, trying to stop black from expanding with b6 or b5 themselves. But b6 will end up happening anyway. Try to open the b file into pressure. Rook c1. e5 first, e3, and rook over to e8. Engine actually wanted e4, which is a very interesting idea here. And then you have queen d7, which is going to be like this type of ordeal, which is nice. And then you're going to stop them from ever playing h3 by playing h5, h4, and just domination of the position. Pretty nice positional play there. So what happened in the game though was rook e8, queen d2, and bishop back to g6, e4, finding e4. And a positional grind, bishop f5, almost finding this entire type of plan. b6, though, breaks it up after taking. b3 is slightly weak. Look at how bad the knight is on c2. Not many squares to go to. So b4 makes total sense. And after rook takes, knight is still very bad. But rook takes b4 allows a4 to be slightly weak. So black bullies that pawn by playing this way. Also stopping rook b7 from happening. Queen c3, double of the rooks. And white is on the defensive. But I can just kind of get better with this position. In fact, Engine likes something like this. This is the route they're trying to take. Knight d7 though, maybe break with c5. And then it actually became a shuffle fest. After h5, stopping g4, king h2. And as you see, white's just kind of making moves, shuffling around. Not many moves to make. A little repeat, just shuffle of the pieces. And then at some point, black breaks with c5. Engine doesn't like it, but from a human standpoint, looking to do something and found some counterplay. Knight takes c5, a4 is hanging. Takes the a4 pawn, and here we go. This is where the tactics start. Rook check. King goes back to g1, and after king g1, bishop takes h3 would actually be losing to a crazy combination with a rook b8 at some point, and rook h8 with the queen on h3. So bringing the rook back to a8, covering the square. f5, bishop takes f5, takes, and after queen takes, it's a huge blunder because rook a2 wins on the spot with queen f2. No way to generally stop it besides giving up all your pieces. So queen c8 did happen here, which is understandable. Just trying to make sure black sees everything. And queen takes, and the game is over. Andrew wins that one. So last win here was actually Linksy versus Brian Lynn. In this game, it was e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and a classic Roy Lopez. What's up, Elliot? Thanks for the follow. So c3, d4, and this situation, this is sort of the King's Indian type of Roy Lopez that black is playing, where you get some fun, and you get a King's Indian type of style from playing e5. So h3, bishop c2. White just play very natural moves. That's what you would always play in the Roy Lopez anyway. This is a similar setup. c4, you want to go knight c3. And now you got a King's Indian by transposition, but a nice one for both sides, to be honest. Knight h5, a4, stopping a b5 push, knight c3, f5, looking to play f5. White finds knight b5, which is nice. And of course, c6 would allow knight takes d6. So after knight f4, c5 is coming up after rook a3. Rook a3 was nice. I like this move. And then in response, bishop h6 was the move. There's also a rook a6, which will be played, which is kind of cool to see both the rooks on the a file like this. C5 was pushed, and this is a thematic break that happens lots of times in the King's Indian, especially with white. You want to break on the queen side while black is doing the same thing on the king side. C5, rook A6, which holds, but white, as you see, the bar is already better. Bishop E3 is coming up. Rook C3 actually was played in this position, though. Bishop E3 is to follow. F5, Bishop E3. Bishop takes. Pawn's really strong here. Brings the rook back. King H2, so we can go G3, kick this knight away. G5, we go G3, and here come the tactics. Knight takes H3, which we understand and why it's played, because it kind of has to be played in a way. Yeah, you need to do something. Knight takes H3. You just want to do something instead of going back, but this is going to be disastrous for black. After pawn takes, this was the right move. King takes H3 allows lots of tactics. And then the other right move is not taking once again, but taking here. And then the other right move, instead of taking this, was actually go G4, so which was found by Linksy very accurate here. After G4, takes, and now white's just clearly up in exchange. Knight F4, takes. Rooks look good, and the rest was precision. Hitting H7, weak point. Rook H1, nice tactic, allowing queen takes G4, which happens. Rook G3, nice. Can't take the rook because I'll take the queen. But I have F3, counter check, or another check, not a counter, but takes, and nice. The double of the rooks here. Black is able to defend slightly after rook check, king E2, rook F7, and very nice move from Zhu here. Zhu with B6, understanding the rook is overloaded in a way you can't defend everything, and the king's too far away from stopping the queening from happening. So takes on B6, push happens. After rook D7, we can sacrifice on G7, which was found instantly. Rook takes, push. One more move from black, and after queening, Linksy wins in the last round. Very nice, and here we go, right on time. Look at that. We get to recap this game too, as this was ended in a draw here. Tani is the champion, in fact, and let's see his last game as he wins the 2025 U.S. Cadet Championship 2 years in a row. Congratulations to Tani. Great job. As he's clinched it, he's already had it. I mean, he had it already. Even if he lost this game, he still would be the champion. But in the game, he just chose a very easy setup. He just said, you know what? I don't have to play anything crazy. It's not a must win. It's actually a must not lose. But actually, no, it wasn't. In fact, I could have played anything. He says Tani, because he was already champion here with 5.5. This makes him have 6, and the closest to him is 5, I think. So that actually gives him a clear point, and also be able to take first once again 2 years in a row at the 2025 U.S. Cadet Championship. So, I mean, very easy game, you know, Catalan type stuff. Knight takes F6, B6. This is all theory. Takes, right, and Bishop A6, which hits C4. And then after Knight E5, there's Queen C7, takes Rook to C8. And Tani goes down a pawn, but it's a very easy way to create some pressure to try to get the pawn back. But really, everything just kind of traded out. You know, we got an in-game quite quickly. Rook takes, bishop goes to B5. Doubling of the rooks. G5, takes, and trades. Like, it's a lot of trades. And we, you know, you guys were watching from this point too. We spent a lot of time here. This was a blunder in a way from Tani playing G4, going down now 2 pawns here. Right now, you're down 2 pawns. Now, that's difficult. And 1 pawn, okay, easier to do. Even moves like King G7 makes sense. Rook E1, or, you know, even Rook C2 could be possible. But Bishop F5 is another one. G4 actually does just give up a 2nd pawn, but he felt like he needs to do this to put the bishop back on D5, which he does. Anchors the bishop, both sides. Weakness here, weakness here. I should be able to, weakness here, right? I should be able to get some stuff back. Rook A4, King G7, and of course, after some trades here, I get a pawn back. I'm still down 2 pawns, but I'm making it work. F5, which is a really strong move. Very nice. Now, kind of stopping white from advancing. So after en passant, king takes. Yeah, he has these pawns here, or she has these pawns, but it's difficult to actually use them, especially with this being on target too as well. Rook to B8, E5, which was actually not the right move. In fact, the right move was King G5, but hey, it's an in-game. Everyone gets them wrong generally. E5, rook to B5 was an error. In fact, G4 was supposed to be the right move here, which is hard to play. Like, G4 is just not human. But of course, that's why the engine finds G4. Not the most human. Rook B5, which hitting the bishop. Rook to D2. And then bishop G4. Rook over to D3, hitting F3 and B3 at the same time. I'm grabbing a pawn back. I grab that pawn. And then after e4, saying I'm going to push, but I need to make sure my rook is covered. Rook f2. Now I'm going to push this here. The rook is awkwardly placed. So I push. Now this rook has to go get this pawn. After we trade off pawns, we have a classic draw. Right, Philidor position or go from behind and check this way. Shuffle. And then even here, this is a Philidor right now. Philidor type position here. You control the rank where the pawn wants to push, basically. King here and pushing, perfect. And as soon as they push, Tani flawlessly went to the back rank, and checks will be endless. Check, and probably a draw offer was here, and a draw secures it, but he also had it already. As we check the results table here, you can see first place is Tani with 6 points, Andrew Jiang with 5, Rose Atwell with 4.5. First place gets $1,000 here, and 10,000 in sponsorships or scholarships. Let's go. What did it say? In fact, 10,000 in scholarships. That's what it is. 10,000 in scholarships and $1,000 in cash over there. Congratulations to all the players that played in great chess and another year of the 2025 U.S. Cadet Championships. We'll see you guys on the next one.